Last week, we learned how to graph a sine function. We learned what is amplitude, period, and how to label 5 points within one period for the sine function. And today, this week, we're just going to do a little bit more practice to make sure you can graph every single type sine function. We will start with the easiest kind. So we don't see any amplitude, no horizontal and vertical shift. Okay, we start with the easy one here. Okay, so do you guys remember how to find the amplitude? Let's go ahead to start. So amplitude is the number in front of sine here, right? Do we see a number? If you don't see a number in front of sine, then the amplitude is 1. Just like when we figure out the coefficient, if you don't see a number, you assume the coefficient is 1. Now we're going to find the period. The formula for period for sine function is 2 pi over b. Okay, right here, actually, let me remind you guys what is a, b, c, and d for sine function. So a is the number in front of sine, b is the number in front of x, c is the number after x, and the d is normally outside the function. Okay, so here period is 2 pi over b. So what is b here? I see 4. Make sure you have to simplify it. Because I did not tell you to round your answer, so please just simplify it, leave as a fraction. Now we are going to look at the horizontal shift. The number C represents the horizontal shift. That is a horizontal shift. And the D represents the vertical shift. Okay, let's go back to this function. We see that the function is y equal to sine of 4x. I don't see any number after x, so which means there's no horizontal shift and no vertical shift. You can go ahead to write none for both of these cases. Okay? Okay, so now after you fill those questions out, you are ready to draw the graph. For the summative, it will be the same type of question. Ask you to graph, answer amplitude, period, horizontal shift, vertical shift, and label the 5 points within one period. So we're going to practice here. Okay, so how to graph the amplitude? Where do I graph the amplitude? So let's review that amplitude goes to the y-axis. I hope you still remember. And also remember that the amplitude is always one positive number and one negative number. The definition for amplitude is the highest point from the midline, right? So that's why here we have the distance. Here is 1. The midline here is the x-axis. We are going to label the period on x-axis. So the period is pi over 2, just somewhere on the x-axis away from the origin, because you want some space in between to put your midpoint there. So do you guys remember how many midpoints do we need to put in between here? How many times? Okay, the answer is 3. So you need to put 3 midpoints here. Okay, so let's look at here. So between 0 and a pi over 2, we need to find the first midpoint. Some people might be able to do that in your head, but some people might have to do it by hand. That's okay. I'm going to do it the most obvious, clear way to show you guys. So the midpoint formula is add the endpoint together and divide it by 2. 0 and the pi over 2 are the two endpoints, okay, for the midpoint. So that's why 0 and the pi over 2 will be adding up and divided by 2. So 0 plus pi over 2, which you will have pi over 2 on the top, divided by 2. Fraction. That's when you need to keep the numerator, change division to multiplication, and flip. So your final answer should be pi over 4. That makes sense, right? Midpoint for pi over 2 divided by half again. So you should have pi over 4. Because these numbers is very easy to figure out, so you can do this one in your head in the future. You don't have to show me your work. However, for the more complicated one I will show you, you must show work. Now we are going to find the midpoint between 0 and pi over 4. It is the same definition. You use 0 plus pi over 4 and divide it by 2. So 0 plus pi over 4 divided by 2, you will have pi over 4 divided by 2, which is pi over 4 times 1 over 4. Make sure divided by 2, which means you want to multiply it by 1 over 2. So that's why you have a pi over 8. I apologize here if I went into way too much detail, but I just want to make sure you guys understand. Now we need to find the midpoint between pi over 4 and 2. That is the more complicated one. So yes, I would recommend you guys have to show that work on the paper, okay? So pi over 4 plus pi over 2 divided by 2. What is a pi over 4 plus pi over 2? Two fractions, they don't have the common denominator, which we have to make them to have a common denominator. So the least common denominator 2 and 4 here is 4. So I want to make sure the second denominator becomes 4. So what will the numerator be? 2 times 2 is 4. So that's why you will have 2 pi on the top and divided by 2. So what is the numerator now? Pi plus 2 pi, total you have 3 pi over 4 divided by 2. So make sure 3 pi over 4 divided by 2, which is times 1/2. So your final answer is 3 pi over 8. Make sure double check to see if you can simplify your answer. 3 and 8, you cannot simplify, so let's leave it there. 3 pi over 8 is your third midpoint. Now we can start to graph the function. Do you guys still remember the pattern for sine function? We can review that really quick. So the pattern is you start with the origin and then you go to the maximum point. Then you go to the center. Then you go to the minimum point. Then you go back to the center. So the origin is right here. I'm going to use a different color so we can see this graph clearly. Origin represents 0, 0. It's always the same pattern when you graphing the sine function. So origin, now we're going to the maximum point. Go back to the center, go down to the minimum point, and then go back to the center. Okay? We don't have a horizontal and a vertical shift, so you don't need to move any of these points. All you need to do is to connect these points and draw a curved line. Okay, I will not stop my graph at here. You want to continue your curve to show that your graph continues on each end. Okay, you don't need to be accurate after these 5 points. So the last step, make sure. Do not forget here what is the very last step you need to do. Label the 5 points within one period. Okay, which means our period is 0 and pi over 2, right? Make sure label these points. Some people back then, they like to show me the points, all the maximum points. For example, here's a pi over 8, here this point, and the next point here, and those points. Those points will not be acceptable. Okay, you have to label the 5 points that's within this interval here, not jumping random points that you could find. Okay, so let's go ahead to do that. The first point is 0, 0. Second point is pi over 8 and 1. Pi over 4 and 0. 3 pi over 8 and negative 1. The last point is a pi over 2 and 0. That's how we complete graphing y equal to sine 4x. Let's compare the second example to the first example. The only difference is the negative sign here, right? So do you guys remember what does the negative sign represent? The negative sign, let's just review here. When we have a negative fx, right, back then in trimester 1, negative fx represent reflected over which one? Yes, x-axis. Okay, so what does that mean is everything on top of the x-axis will go down, everything on the bottom of x-axis will go up. Okay, so here's our origin x and the y-axis. Even though the a in this case is negative 2, but our amplitude is still positive 2 because amplitude is always absolute value of the letter a, which is a number in front of sine. So absolute value of negative 2 is 2, amplitude is 2. So exactly the same thing, give us that the y value here is 2 and the negative 2. Oh, I just realized that actually the coefficient in front of sine is different, right? The first example is 1, now we have 2, so that's also another difference. Now we can start label the period. Period still stay the same because b is 4, so let's write it out. Formula is 2 pi over b, which is 4, so you simplify that, pi over 2 is a period. Okay, so do we have a horizontal vertical shift? We don't see any number after x, so none for both here. Okay, the last one just giving us an instruction that we're going to label this graph at the end, so do not forget to do that. Okay, so now I'm going to graph this function. I already labeled the amplitude. Now I'm going to label the period. Pi over 2, which is right here. Whatever after you label your period, you have to find those 3 midpoints. So the first midpoint between 0 and pi over 2, we already did that, which is a pi over 4. 0 and pi over 4, 0 plus pi over 4 divided by 2, you have a pi over 8. Same here, pi over 4 plus a pi over 2 and divided by 2, then that gives us 3 pi over 8. Okay, now I'm going to graph the function. So what is the pattern here? The pattern is the same, right? Origin, maximum point, center, minimum point, and the center. However, one thing's a little different. We have a negative sign right here. Well, how is that going to change our graph? Okay, so the origin is not going to make a difference, but the maximum point going to be reflected over the x-axis. Center stay the same, okay, and the maximum point and the center. So that will be your final graph for negative 2 sine 4x. Do not forget, use a curved line to connect them. And also continue your curve after. You don't need to be perfect. Just need to show me that the graph continues on both sides. Do not forget to label the 5 points. 0, 0, pi over 8, negative 2, pi over 4, 0, and 3 pi over 8, 2, and the last one, pi over 2 and 0. I hope you guys feel this is still not so bad, right? I think the last one we're getting a little bit difficult, but if you do step by step, just like back then we graph family of graphs, it's just a little long, tedious, but it's not hard, okay? I'm so proud of you guys. Let's see the next example. Okay, here is the third example. Things a little bit more complicated. We're having a c value here. Y equal to a sine bx plus c plus d. Okay, so c represents the horizontal shift. Let's quickly answer amplitude. Absolute value of negative 2, amplitude is 2. Period, 2 pi over b, 2 pi over 4, which is a pi over 2. Horizontal shift, the formula is c over b, which is c is negative pi over 4. So this value is a negative value, what do you say? Pi over 4, if c is less than 0, which way are you going? We are going to the right. Pi over 4 unit to the right. Do we see another number after c? No, we do not see a number after c, so we say no vertical shift. Okay, don't forget at the end, we want to make sure label the 5 points within one period. I am going to start to show the amplitude, which is on the y-axis. Positive and negative number for the amplitude on the y-axis. Period is pi over 2. Okay, we're going to go ahead to do the midpoint 3 times. If you have a different number, do exact the same thing, okay? For a period, right? If you have for pi over 6, you do the same. Find the midpoint, midpoint, midpoint 3 times every single time. So pi over 8 and 3 pi over 8. Okay, so we're going to graph the function. Don't forget here we have a negative 2 sine 4x minus pi. Negative, we're going to change the pattern a little bit, right? The pattern is reflected over x-axis. So we're going to do origin, minimum, center, maximum, and the center. That is our graph before horizontal and vertical shift. So the horizontal shift is pi over 4 units to the right. Okay, just in case the value gets more complicated, I'm going to do a little table here to show us exactly how are this graph going to shift. I'm going to start to showing the original points, which is 0, 0, pi over 8, negative 2, pi over 4, 0, 3 pi over 8, 2, and pi over 2 and 0. Okay, we are shifting pi over 4 to the right, which means that all the x value going to add pi over 4 and the y value stays the same. So can you guys quickly figure out what are these new x values here? So the first number obviously will become pi over 4, 0. Now will be pi over 8 plus pi over 4, comma, y value does not change, keep as negative 2. Pi over 4 plus pi over 4, 0. 3 pi over 8 plus pi over 4, 2. Pi over 2 plus pi over 4, 0. Do not forget, we have to simplify those numbers. Pi over 4 is no need to simplify, right? I can see right here. So here is my new point, pi over 4. Now we're going to look at the second point. Second point, we need to make sure add this up. Pi over 8 plus pi over 4. The common denominator is 8. So I need to change pi over 4 to 2 pi over 8. And then y value is negative 2. So that simplified, it gives me 3 pi over 8 and negative 2. 3 pi over 8 and negative 2 is right here. Now we are going to continue. Pi over 4 plus pi over 4, that gives me 2 pi over 4 and 0. Make sure simplify that, which is pi over 2 and 0. Pi over 2 and 0, back to the center. Okay, we don't have any more numbers on the x-axis, so that's why you really need to do this by hand to figure out what value exactly, right? Okay, so 3 pi over 8 plus pi over 4, common denominator is 8. 2 pi over 8 and 2. Total, you have 5 pi over 8 and 2. So that will be a next number. 5 pi over 8 and 2, which is right here. The last number is 2 pi over 2 and pi over 4. The common denominator is 4, so 2 pi over 4 plus pi over 4, common 0. Your number is 3 pi over 4, common 0. 3 pi over 4 is right here. Oops, what I'm writing here. Let me change that. Okay, so you have 3 pi over 4. So going back here, last number, 3 pi over 4 and 0. Okay, we did a horizontal shift. We do not need to do the vertical shift. That's all we need to do. Do not forget to connect the points. Continue after the connecting points on both ends here. Oh, I know that I can make this a little nicer, right, on the left hand side here. So I can moving this, going back, actually passing through, right? This graph gives us nice pattern. Okay, the last thing we need to do not forget to label the points. Pi over 4, 0. 3 pi over 8, negative 2. Pi over 2, 0. 5 pi over 8, 2. And 3 pi over 4, 0. That's it. Make sure graph the function and label the points. Okay, so here is the last example. Obviously it's the hardest one, but I don't think it will be that much harder since we've been practice one by one, right? With the level of difficulty, just slowly is increasing here. So I think you guys will feel this one is actually manageable. It's not so bad. Let's quickly fill out the amplitude period, horizontal, vertical shift, okay? So amplitude, again, the number in front of sine, which is negative 2. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2. Period, 2 pi over b, which is 4, so pi over 2. Horizontal shift, c over b, which is negative pi over 4, that represent pi over 4 units to the right. Vertical shift is the last number, 3 units up. Because it's 3 positive, a positive 3 represents 3 units up. We are ready to graph the function. Origin, x and y axis. Amplitudes on the y axis. Let's go ahead to do that. So 2 and negative 2. Period is right here. Pi over 2. Okay, only because I did it before. Let's say if this is the first question you see on the test, then you have to do here. You have to find the midpoint step by step, okay? Because I already know what the midpoints are, so I'm just going to write it out really quick. Pi over 4, pi over 8, and the third midpoint is 3 pi over 8. Okay, so we basically already did the horizontal shift, right? So I'm going to start it from there. Okay, I'm going to continue from where we left it from example 3. I'm going to go ahead to use those numbers we have. Well, instead of the y value did not change, here we have 3 units up. So I'm going to add 3 units on all these y values, okay? Okay, so the first point becomes pi over 4 and 3. Second point becomes 3 pi over 8, negative 2 plus 3. Next one is pi over 2. 0 plus 3 is 3. Next one is 5 pi over 8. 2 plus 3. Last number is 3 pi over 4 and 0 plus 3. Make sure you have to simplify it. Okay, those points you want to be simplified. The first one is, first one we did not need to do anything. So second one, the point you actually have is 3 pi over 8 and 1. Now next one, you don't need to change, and 5 pi over 8 and 5. Last number is 3 pi over 4 and 3. Now we can find these points. So pi over 4 and 3, well, we don't see a 3, so go ahead to label 3 on the y-axis. 1, 2, 3. I think that biggest number for y is 5, so 4 and 5. I'm just going to label everything out so I can find the points more easy. Okay, so after pi over 2, I see another two x values here is 5 pi over 8 and 3 pi over 4. We can put those points on the x-axis too. So 5 pi over 8 and 3 pi over 4. Okay, so we are going to continue to graph this function. The first point is pi over 4 and 3 right here. Second point is 3 pi over 8 and 1. Next one is pi over 2 and 3. 5 pi over 8 and 5. Okay. And 3 pi over 4 and 3. Okay, we can connect these points. Continue to draw the wave. Again, you do not need to worry about the accuracy after the endpoints here. Go ahead to label out. I know you already have on your table, but if you label it out one more time for me, it would be better. 3 pi over 8 and 1. Pi over 2 and 3. 5 pi over 8 and 3. No, 5 pi over 8 and 5. And the last point is 3 pi over 4 and 3. Perfect. We've completed everything, and we also answered the question that they want us to label the 5 points within one period. So that's it. This is a hardest example and the type question you will see on this week's summative. Okay, so please feel free to reach out to me through email, Remind app, or during my office hour. I'm also going to set up a Zoom live session. Feel free to join me. Good luck, guys. Hope you guys will do well on the summative.